Hi, I'm Brett Cenkus, a business attorney and M&A broker. And today we are talking about how to avoid buying a bad business or how to protect yourself from buying a bad business. Before we do that, I want to remind you that this video, all my articles, tools, templates, checklists, free legal documents, all of it free, all M&A, can be accessed at merger-resources.com. If you want to book a call with me, go to clarity.fm/Brett Cenkus. Both those links are in the description of the video. So let's get into it. You think about buying a business. This is generally aimed at the first-time buyer, but it's not exclusive. I mean, it's relevant content for others. But and you're worried, what if how do I avoid buying the wrong business or a bad business? What do I do if that happens? I'm going to give you 6 tips, actions, steps you can take to avoid or protect yourself if that were to happen. The first is look at a lot of businesses. Right, and what I mean by that is it's very easy if you decide you want to buy a business to fall in love with the first thing you see, or if something just fell into your lap. And maybe you own a business and someone came to you and they're just selling. It's really easy to convince yourself that that's a great deal, and it may be, okay, but it's probably not, or certainly not the once in a lifetime kind of deal. It's very common though to sort of fall in love, want to do a deal once you decide you're going to do something, to really want to do it. And the discipline of looking at a lot of businesses has a lot of value. I'm not saying waste anyone's time, but don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to, look at another business. You're just going to learn a lot about that process. I've got videos about search funds. It's a vehicle where someone raises money to go find a business to buy and spend up to 2 years looking at a lot of different businesses. And that discipline and the knowledge and the understanding, you'll know a better deal if you've got more context and experience to spot it. So certainly don't be afraid to look at a lot of businesses and not fall in love with the first thing you see. Number 2, get good advisors, right? Look, someone's self-serving, given I'm an M&A advisor, but it is helpful to have advisors who do M&A and they've been there. Investment bankers or business brokers and attorneys in particular. And ask them questions. Ask them about what you're seeing. We get a lot of questions, partly because I've got a career outside of law, but a lot of questions about just generally, not just legal in nature. What do you think of this business? What's going on? Clients who work with us sort of realize that we've seen a lot of different things. We've seen a lot of things be successful and a lot of things go wrong. And so get good advisors, get ones that aren't afraid to tell you what the deal is and shoot straight, and ask them and bring them in and ask them questions. Number 3, due diligence. This is I've got a whole video about due diligence. It's a big part of buying a business, or if you're a seller, it's going to be a big part of your life going through it for buyers. But due diligence is the process of kicking the tires, looking under the hood, and being sure that what you're going to buy is what you think it is and what's being represented to you. So this is a very in-depth process. There are lots of different things you can do in due diligence to protect yourself from buying the wrong business. 1, lien searches. If you've hired an M&A attorney, M&A broker, or investment bankers, they ought to be guiding you down this path. You shouldn't be doing this alone. But if you're DIYing, let me give you a few tips for things that you would absolutely want to do. Lien searches. So you're going to go look. Usually most of the liens you're going to be worried about are going to be at the Secretary of State level in most states. You're going to look and see, are there anyone else making a claim to the assets of the business? Is there anything filed against the business's assets? Some things like vehicle liens, stuff like that might be filed elsewhere, but you're going to do searches and make sure that there's no other claims on the assets. Litigation searches, certainly local courts, county, state courts, to see what's going on with this company. Hey, Google, right? Go look at Google reviews and Google searches and figure out there's a lot you can do there just to see what are people saying about this company? What am I being told? What was represented to me? Is that adding up? You can do customer and employee interviews. Now, usually a buyer doesn't want you to do this a seller doesn't want you to do this very early in the process, so that's all negotiable. But certainly if it makes sense to do it, particularly if you got business-to-business customers, it's a consumer business that's got just lots of customers who pay with a credit card online, some e-commerce business, customer reviews aren't very relevant. You wouldn't speak to them individually. You might read the Google reviews and see what's going on with the company. But if it's a company that's got more long-term, higher paying clients, and they contract with them, doing interviews and asking what's going on can be very insightful. Same with employees. And again, that's got to be negotiated with the seller, but certainly you can push for that and push for that, before closing. Ask lots of questions. All right, nothing is off limits. You're entitled to all the information you want to ask. In fact, securities law says that depending on the way the business is being sold, just generally speaking, the seller has an obligation to share with you anything you want to get. Really, there's just nothing should be off limits. You shouldn't be afraid to ask for anything. Now, usually due diligence proceeds in multiple stages. The first one is sort of high level. Do we want to maybe buy this business? And there's a letter of intent signed before you go to the next level. But that second level of diligence can be everything you want, and don't feel any hesitation about asking for things. And if they exist, get them. There's really just no good answer for why you won't be given something if it's data that the company has or should reasonably have. So ask lots of questions. If you get any sort of red flag or any answer that isn't really satisfying, push. It's so common that clients will come back and, they'll say, this is an issue. And we'll say, well, why don't you go ask this? And they'll come back with an answer that's just like, not really that satisfying. Push, run it to ground. The seller's got an obligation to do this. And if you've already got a signed letter of intent, you're at that stage, I'm not sure I can ever remember a deal blowing up because of, pushing for more information. Now, you'll get pressure from advisors, the seller, and the seller's advisors that we got to close, we got to move. That's part of the game. But get the information you need, follow up, and ask more questions. And then there's confirmatory type of due diligence that we don't always get. Like, it's not that common. It should be done more. That you can ask for tax returns, bank statements. You can confirm the financials you're being given out of QuickBooks. You can go get data to support these things. Now, that's not always necessary or always really warranted. But if you got any hesitation about what you're being told, the seller's financials out of QuickBooks, especially if they're not reviewed, if they're not audited, even reviewed by a CPA, they're just what the seller put together. And there will be representations about those in the purchase agreement. We'll get to that in a minute. But, you can ask for things that have a higher degree of confidence in what you see. And a bank statement, certainly the top line revenue ought to match up with the deposits in the business bank accounts. It's very simple. If you have questions, just audit that. You don't have to audit that going back 5 years. You can pick a 6-month period and just see, does it match up? So due diligence, very, very important, and don't cut it short. Okay, item 4 is a deal structure technique or tactic, which is you can make part of the purchase price or a lot of the purchase price. In fact, we've seen deals that are 100% done with contingent payments. In other words, what we call earnouts. And 100% is rare, and that business probably doesn't have lots of buyers. But it's not uncommon to use an earnout. We don't really use them by default, and they can be sources of, they take some time to customize and write them correctly, and then they can be sources of post-closing disputes. But let's just start with the idea that it is a technique to mitigate risk. What we mean by that is instead of paying $5 million for this business, maybe you pay $3 million. And if everything turns out to be what you think, or the employees transition over, the customers transition and stay, the business grows next year, then maybe you'll pay $3 million. In other words, you don't necessarily have to pay more, but it's a way to sort of share risk and allocate risk and put some back on the seller. So if that doesn't happen, you don't pay that amount. It's contingent on certain metrics or performance post-closing. It's a tremendous way to mitigate your risk. Again, it's not the default technique, and there's some complexities to it, but keep it in mind because that's a great way to make the seller share in some of that risk. And we've seen deals where that's what's held that together is by, when something comes up, is to change, the structure of the deal and pay less up front and pay, what you would have paid or even more over time to the seller to take some of that risk off your shoulders. Okay, item 5 is the purchase agreement, right? So this is mostly something to protect you on the backside, but it also is helpful sort of on the front side to make sure you don't buy a bad business. On the backside, it's what do you do if you do? But the purchase agreement is an opportunity to flesh out issues and to make sure you're seeing what you ought to see. So just the process of negotiating the terms of the purchase agreement is helpful. And I said earlier, get good advisors. This also, you really want the seller to have good advisors. the process of, as an advisor, we are trying to make sure that we keep our clients out of trouble. We're guiding them, we're leading them. And so we work as an attorney, we have fiduciary duty to our clients to work on their behalf. But part of that is making sure that they're doing what they need to do. And so what I mean by that is when we're representing the seller, we're also looking for things that need to be disclosed, issues that have to be presented to the buyer. We're guiding that. We're kind of helping that stuff come to light. When we represent the buyer, we're negotiating representations and warranties, which are particular section of the purchase agreement that are basically statements of fact about what the business is. We're putting a lot of that in front of the seller and fleshing those things out, getting the seller to tell us, hey, that statement is mostly right except for this. And so we're sort of that process of just getting in there and having advisors in particular negotiate and work through those things brings most issues it's going to bring out a lot of issues and things that should come out and need to come out. And part of that happens through due diligence, and part of that happens through this process of negotiating the purchase agreement. So, we have run into times when a seller doesn't want the buyer to hire a lawyer, wants to just do this deal without lawyers, do it with a form they get from some sort of intermediary. And hey, that sometimes might work. I'm not going to say it never does, but it does feel like over the years, more often when we hear that, it's a seller who doesn't want to be bothered with something, doesn't want to be, there's a reason that they don't want to have everyone under the hood like that and pushing them on these things. They don't want the liability that comes with a heavily negotiated purchase agreement. There's other aspects or terms of the purchase agreement that are helpful. One, and you can think of this kind of like a deal structure issue, but I think about it more like a purchase agreement term because it all shows up in 90% of our deals. As a buyer, you agree to hold back some of the money. We call this an escrow holdback. So this is different than the earnout. Again, that's contingent. The seller may never get that money. This is money that the seller is going to get, but you're going to hold it for some period of time. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. We did a deal recently 2 years. It just depends. And it might often be 5 or 10% of the purchase price, but it could be what you need it to be. And that money could be, you can hold down that money as the buyer, or you can hire a third-party escrow agent to do it. Again, all negotiable. But this money is going to be the seller's money, provided it isn't used to satisfy post-closing claims for things that the seller owes you as the buyer. Indemnity is the concept after close. They've got to make good on something. So it could be this, the representations and warranties we talked about. Perhaps one of them was not entirely accurate, right? Maybe the seller said, yeah, there's absolutely, no facts. I'm not aware of any facts that giving rise to a potential litigation lawsuit from an employee. And you find out after closing, you get a sexual harassment claim from an employee. And somehow it depends on the sort of structure of the deal and everything. But if that's coming to you as the buyer, you would go back to the seller for this. And generally, if there's exposure for you as the buyer, it just depends on kind of how you structure the deal and other things. But if there is, you would have a claim against the seller. And whether or not you're holding money under an escrow holdback, you would have a right to pursue the seller for that claim. But holding that money is really helpful. Makes it a lot easier, especially if the deal isn't a big deal and the seller's not getting life-changing money. It's really easy for a seller to blow through that money or not have anything left or put it into trusts. And so holding on to some of that is really, really helpful. Number 6, avoid deal heat. And this kind of goes back to the first item. It's look at a lot of businesses. Don't be afraid to walk away. But, there really isn't a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Or if there are, you can be very safe thinking you haven't found it yet. And that when you think it, you're just sort of convincing yourself of something that's not entirely true. I really believe that there's a lot more blood in the streets, so to speak, from doing a deal when you have a little bit of hesitation than thinking I missed, that was the one that got away, or I missed this tremendous deal. They're just, that is just so rare, and there are other opportunities. So don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to walk away over price early on. If something's coming up, it's really easy. Deal heat is this concept of like, we've come this far, we want to get this deal done, we're excited. And M&A is an exciting emotional event. And sellers want to close and buyers want to close too. But when things start showing up, due diligence questions that aren't properly answered, just things coming out or you're just realizing it's not exactly what we thought of this business, do not be afraid to walk away. Even if you're deep into a deal, it's just, again, I can say with a high degree of certainty that the confidence that you're going to be a lot happier about walking away if you've got some hesitation than thinking, oh, that was the one that got away. So anyway, those are 6 steps you can take to protect yourself. Interested if you've got any experiences with any of this, you run into issues or use other tactics or tools that I didn't mention, drop a comment below, and appreciate you watching today.